This is indeed webinar 4 of our series of webinars. We look at the program later on. That one will focus on electricity and net zero. That's not moving.
Click on this.
What we're going to look at, what's the agenda for today? So it's chapter 1 and 8, electricity and nets. And we're going to have a quick recap of what we did last week on chapter 5. And we looked at innovation very quickly, because that's what came out of the previous webinar session 1 and 2. I'll explain what the program is going to look like and the methodology we're going to use, which is the same methodology than what we use for chapter 5. And we'll look at chapter 1 and 8 specifically, using the 4 key parameters of discover, define, develop, and deliver. And as part of discover, we'll look at innovation, which is really what we wanted to focus on. And at the end of innovation, we'll take a break before we jump into opportunities, skills, and roadmap. So what did we do in chapter 5? We looked at waste and circular economy. In the discover bit, we provided innovation, example of innovation in Scotland and further afield, in order for people to understand what vision they can develop based on that chapter. We'll then look at the motivation piece, which was about the opportunities and the opportunity created by the outcomes that the Scottish Government is expecting to see, and therefore the actions they are planning to put in place to deliver those outcomes. And then examples of projects that people could put their teeth in. And then in the develop piece, we looked at our capabilities, and by that we meant skills especially. To remind you, this project is sponsored by SDS, Skills Development Scotland, and skills is a big part. You would have seen the old article lately from Scottish Engineering, but it is a big part. So capability focused on skills and what's needed, the access and funding. And finally, the roadmap, and we emphasize the fact that the roadmap needs to be smart, and as part of the smart, the time bound is a key piece of it. And what we talked about was about a pathway to the process. So that's what we did in chapter 5 last week. And now the other piece is about innovation. So why innovation? Because at the end of session 1 and 2, not only did our survey show that that was a key piece of it, but we all know that to deliver net zero, we're going to need to innovate. And what does innovation mean? So we looked at, the stakeholder, the consumer, which allowed to develop a vision. And that's what we address in part 1. So if you refer back to the presentation of the decks, which are available on Scottish Engineering website, you find out that part 1 was about what is about developing a vision, mainly driven by the consumer. From the customer point of view, we looked at the market piece and the motivations, and we looked at that in chapter 2, in part 2, sorry, where we looked at chapters and the range of chapters available. By that time, we were looking at all 8 chapters, not like we're doing today, focusing on 2. Then we looked at the supplier, and I was addressing part 3 with the view to the supply skills and how to get skills and how to embed them into the process. And then we had the last one, which was the roadmap. And the roadmap was part 4 of session 2, which looked at the when and how do they all need to fit in the business strategy. Here, the key stakeholder is a business. And if you go all 4 pillars, then you're likely to have innovation, and innovation being an invention that sells. And why do you want those? Because if you don't have a vision, you're just going to create confusion. And without motivation, you're going to face resistance. And if you don't have the capability to deliver your vision, you're going to just generate frustrations. And finally, if it doesn't match your business strategy and you don't have a roadmap, then the whole thing is just going to be wasted because nobody's going to listen. So that's what we looked at, and that's what we found out. So from that, plus the review of the survey we did at the end of webinar 2, we created a program. So webinar 1 and 2 were done and were more generic, and then we moved to the chapter-specific series. And last week we had webinar 3 on waste and circularity. And this week we're going to focus on electricity and nets, which is chapter 1 and 8. So the methodology we're going to use is the same methodology than what we used last week. And what that means, in the Discover bit, we looked at examples of innovation in Scotland, which is important, but also further afield. So that's what you see with those 3 flags, Scotland, the UK, and further afield. And then we'll focus today on chapters 1 and 8. So that will give us the define piece, the opportunities, and for that we're getting inspiration from the climate change plan developed by the Scottish Government. And then we looked at developing those skills, the execution part. The first 2 were about ideation, this is now about execution. And in the skills piece, and we looked at chapter-specific skills, but based on the CSAP that's been developed by SDS, the skill action plan. And finally, we looked at how we deliver that roadmap. So build a roadmap and deliver the roadmap. That's the executions, and normally you would expect to end up with a strategy. So we'll start with Discover. And we'll start with, obviously, focus on chapter 1 and 8, but we'll start with innovations, which was the main interest. So for easiness, those are the actions of that chapter, the electricity chapter, that was presented in session 2, I believe. And what I've done for ease is I've used icons for each action. So that's where you can see wind, you can see hydro capacity, harbor, technology, hydrogen, negative emission technology, nets, and carbon capture. So, and now we'll use those icons when we go through innovations, to explain which action is the innovation tapping into. And the same thing for nets, and you can see here again, you've got emerging technologies for the same icons, bioenergy, CCS, and nets. And what I've added here is example of industries that fit within NET's negative technology, negative emission technology, sorry. And you can see here a lot of focuses on bioenergy, a lot of focuses on CCS, which is direct air capture and that sort of things. So that gives you an idea of what we're going to look at, and I'm going to use those icons going forward. And by that I mean that every example of innovation is going to be based on that template. So I'll show the chapters 1 on 8. I'll show if it's in Scotland, UK, or further afield, and when relevant, the academic partner, the company, which action they are tapping into, which opportunities they are tapping into, a brief description of the company and innovations. And I've color-coded what I think for the Scottish innovation about vision, motivation, capability, and roadmap is how I see those 4 pillars being addressed to deliver innovations. So we'll start with wind in terms of electricity. And one of the first one is Equinor, for example, in Scotland. And what is interesting is how often you're going to see this is the world's first. And in this case, the innovation is about floating wind farms and how high performance that floating wind farm has been. And it was the first one in the world. It was the world's first. And it's a big wind farm, and it's in Scotland. And the advantage of wind farm is to deliver green hydrogen rather than blue hydrogen. Green hydrogen meaning that the electricity is coming from renewable sources. So that's one example of innovation in Scotland, driven by Scotland, of floating wind farm. And you can see, so floating offshore was a vision, and they were looking, the motivation was to improve the capacity factors. And the capability is floating. That's the uniqueness of it. And the roadmap was a drive for the industry to move forward, to go into deeper water. So that's how they had all four key pillars to deliver innovation. The next one, which is very similar, is Boinard, and that's about, again, floating and floating wind farm. And again, it's in Scotland, and here they've got a patented technology. So that's the innovation part of it, and it's a big piece of gear, obviously, and it's trying to tap into deeper water, which is cleaner wind. That's the concept behind it. On a similar fashion, but here looking at hydrogen and develop, again, I think it's a world first, floating green hydrogen facility. So in that case, it's more than just wind, it's wind combined with hydrogen. That was the support of opportunity northeast, as you can see. And the idea here also was about, it taps into things like wind farm, we'll see, but harbour, because they need to develop the facilities in the harbour to put those in place. It's going to be hydrogen because it provides green electricity for green hydrogen, and it's a new technology. So that's the concept behind it. That's the action it's tapping into. Again, in Scotland, and still related to wind, and again, the world first, it was about SCOTTISHPOWER, and what they did is they demonstrated the capability to use wind energy. In the case of a black star, that's when a part of the transmission network goes completely black, out of service, and then they restart it using, basically in this case, wind power, and that was, again, a world first. But that's again another innovation in Scotland. But they don't have to be all big. And here you've got another example of an innovation for wind, which is using basically the traffic. So you can imagine those vertical wind farm mounted on light pillars and posts, and they are being moved by the traffic passing by, and they generate electricity, and electricity could be used for lights, for example. So not all the wind programs have to be big, and that's a UK, so that's a bit further afield. And the other thing you're finding as well is not only those things needs to be built and implemented and installed, etc. They also need to be serviced and maintained. And in case of wind farm, whether the big issue is maintenance and inspections. And here where you go again is another innovation, which is on robotics, and it's about developing what they call the blade bug, which is a robot that can inspect the blade rather than sending a human, and all the problem and the safety issue that can create. Then they've developed a robot, and the robot again has been doing a world first blade walk, so that's going along the blade. So you can see that's maintenance, and that's maintenance on the blade. But what you also get is the ROV side of things, in this case the underwater drones. And one of the bugbear of underwater drone is a tether, is how those are attached to whatever ships on the surface to ensure communications. And then here what they're looking at light, LED light, to communicate and not have a tether. So that's further afield innovations, but you can see how people are looking at not only building and developing and implementing and putting in place wind farm, pardon me, they're also looking at how they can maintain those wind farms, all the work that's going to be related to it. So in terms of wind farm, you can look at further afield GE. GE has developed it as massive alien 30 megawatt wind farm or wind turbine, which, interestingly enough, at one spin of that wind turbine can feed a house for a couple of days. So it is quite impressive, and it's absolutely massive. You can see it's got a sweeper of 38,000 square meters. And the main place is in the UK. It's a Deutsche Bank. That's where he's aiming at. But you can see in the actions they are tapping into, which is wind, which is harbour, new technology, obviously for that size, and then green hydrogen. So that's further afield. But not all of those have to be big. So we've gone from the massive, ridiculous giant to very small. And here you've got an example in Berlin of a wind farm, if you want, or a wind activated artifact, which is street light, sorry. And here you can see it's a lot smaller, a lot more manageable. Pardon me. So you can see how not all wind farm projects have to be of the extent of G, so you go from one extreme to the other. In this innovation, not all wind farm needs to have blades. And here you can see how people have been working on and developing a bladeless wind, which is basically based on vibration rather than using wind to turn a turbine. They are looking at wind to create a vibration and transfer that vibration into electricity. And in here, you see, you don't need even turbine. You can use kite, and that's what those guys have been doing, and developing power and electricity using kite. So you can see how for wind can be big, like G, or can be small, like Berlin. It can be, again, with blades and the wind farm the way we normally understand them, which is what you can see into the floating piece. But it could also be wind farm without blades, or even wind farm without any turbine, like you can see here. So that's just having looked at wind. Another big area is tides, and an example of that, again, in Scotland, is Orbital Marine, who have developed a big turbine, tidal turbine, which is going to be developed, implemented in Orkney. So it's still in Scotland, and still an innovation and something new, and an easiness of maintenance. Maintenance is quite, and reuse is quite at the back of the mind of all those designers and engineers. So that's what you see there. And again, if you think about the vision, climate change, the capability is tidal turbine, and the motivation is tide is a predictable power. It's going to be there every day, twice a day, at least. But those can work both ways. So you're probably thinking about 4 times a day. And the idea also, which is coming up, is that local electricity grid. That's what that one is going to be used for. But what you're having more and more, and I'll come back to that, is local generation, community-owned generation of electricity. So Nova Innovation is another one who's developed tidal energy, and again, another one in Scotland. And in this case, what they are looking at, instead of having one big farm or one big turbine, they are developing an array of turbines. And in this case, that was in Shetland. And their first innovation was about that array. And again, it was a world first, again in Scotland. And not only did they develop an array, but what they also developed, and you can't see much in that picture, but what they also developed was that turbine you've just seen without gearbox, because obviously the least moving part you have, like gearbox, etc., the better off you would be, especially when you work underwater. So that's another innovation, and again, it's in Scotland. And we're looking at alternatives which are not wind and are not tide. And in that world of alternative, you've got wave power, and again, Scotland, and again, Orkney. And here is having another technology, another look at using wave to create electricity. So you're looking at a new technology. Again, it will be green, so it can deliver electricity to develop green hydrogen. And then the idea here, the interesting bit, is to connect it to subsea batteries to store the power. So that's another one. Another alternative is regionalized. That's now moving a bit further afield, the UK wide, and that's about energy storage. And they've developed a high density water system to basically store water or high density water that can be used when required. So that's the idea about storage. How do you store energy? That's a concept behind it. I mean, in here you've got a hydro system, hydro storage, which is another area of interest to the Scottish government, especially considering that in this case they can use smaller slopes or smaller hills, and there's plenty of those in Scotland. So opportunities here. Another alternative is solar power, BORA again here, but more the European side, and that's looking at floating solar farms. So you've got the concept is you've got all those areas occupied by water with not much use to it except as a reservoir, and what can you do to leverage more? How can you do two things out of one piece? And that's what they're looking at for floating solar farms. So you can see it goes further than wind, it goes further than tide. There are other alternatives, and there are alternatives in Scotland, in the UK, and further afield. The other area in terms of electricity or in terms of power is hydrogen, and that's a big bet on hydrogen. And if I look at Scotland, the innovation is how to create hydrogen, and a new technology is how to create hydrogen from non-recyclable plastics. So by the time you've done all the recycling you can, you're still left with unrecyclable plastics. Of interest here are probably the GRP, which was mentioned last week, about, we think all those Windfarm, all those blades made of glass reinforced plastics, GRP, are going to come to the end of life, and that's not easily recyclable. And what do you do with it? And in this case, you've got LNRA that they're using a unique technology which is developed by DMG, and they can use that feedstock of non-recyclable plastics to create hydrogen, electricity, and heat. And that's what they're going to do, and that's their plan in Dumbartonshire. I believe that's where it's going to be implemented. So here is an example of hydrogen or generation of hydrogen. Here is an example of innovation to use hydrogen, and here is Orkney Distillery looking at using hydrogen for heat. And again, that's in Scotland, supported by Napier University. And the idea here is hydrogen used in industries which may not have a straightforward access to natural gas or electricity. So that's going to be a big part. We will come back to that in one of the programs currently ongoing, Cromarty Firth. The other potential will be here. You've got a place that's London, and the innovation here is how you store hydrogen, but without the pressure. So one of the means to store hydrogen at the moment is to basically liquefy it, put out a high pressure to store it. But another alternative those guys have been looking at and developing is using solid state storage. And it's there, it's available, and they are mainly looking at powering drone at the moment, but that's an area where they are doing a lot of investment. So again, it's about hydrogen, it's about how you store hydrogen. And then if you go even further afield than the UK, you could look at India, and what India is looking at that could be of interest to some of our members is power generators, basically how to create power generator that leverage hydrogen, hydrogen base. And you've got an example here in Australia looking at India, which is looking at power clean storage. Creating power and storing power are two of the key, I would say, components of energy usage. And in here, the innovations in Sweden is about using hydrogen to power steel making company. And the idea behind it is, how do you create fossil-free steel? So steel needs a high temperature. Electricity can't reach those high temperature. So natural gas is normally the go-to source of energy. And what those guys are doing is, can we use hydrogen instead of natural gas? And where that is, I think, interested is then, if you think about your scopes, if you think about, becoming net zero, one of the big question mark is, how do I get net zero steel? And that's what those guys are looking at, is how you can create steel, green steel, if you want, by not using natural gas, but using hydrogen. So that's the piece on hydrogen. And then you've got a whole also series of technology. So if I look at Scotland, for example, and still on the electricity chapter, you're looking at off-grid, and here the example of Krill that's got a mixed system with a range of technology and a range of way to generate their own electricity. But one of the key actions from the Scottish government is to help the development of those local community-owned energy generation schemes. And it's one thing to have them, but it's an opportunity in the sense that they will need maintained, they will need serviced, they will need installed. So it's one thing to plan for them, but there is a whole industry at the back of it that creates opportunities. And it can be other things, like in this case, you create energy, electricity by working on it using piezoelectrics, materials innovations, and now it's the University of Bath. And now you can imagine those, in factory where you've got like dedicated forklift routes, or when you've got dedicated safety passageway, which is a lot of foot traffic, a lot of forklift traffic. So can you use that instead of having them going around doing no power, just consuming power? Can they actually generate power? That's the concept behind it. And closer to home, then you've got those portable generators. So again, smaller things, but you can have that at home in case of blackouts or whatever. It's charged solar panels, and you get power here for a week. So and it's portable and it's small. So those are another example, again, further afield about innovation. It doesn't have to be all big. It doesn't have to be all wind or hydrogen. So the last piece, or the other chapter we talked about was nets and negative emission technology. And an example of that, and interestingly enough, you need to go further afield as soon as you look into nets. And in Iceland, they've got that power plant that creates stones out of that carbon. So the carbon emissions are negated by the creation of stones. Again, further afield, you've got a company that have developed a flat pack house. And in here, the idea is that house, it comes with negative emission technology. And normally, so it's easy to install. So the cost of installations and the energy used to install them is quite low. But also they come with all the technology you would want to have. And a bit more unusual is you've got things like carbon capturing clothing collection, which is basically in this case developed by DS Automobile, which is a capsule collection, but it's basically your clothes you're wearing are the one that are capturing CO2, and that seems about out of there, but before you know it, you find out that there is more than one place, there is more than one country which is looking at that. And in this case, it's carbon negative raincoats. So again, it's clothes and things you can wear that capture carbon. So it's your as an individual is how you play into that concept of net zero. So we talked about it, about educating your consumer, but also educating your employee, and what do you want to share with your employee, what you want to provide, and maybe PPE, that sort of thing. So that's not so far-fetched. Another area is vodka, and what those guys have developed in that vodka, which is carbon capture, because they heat water, and from that they get hydrogen power and oxygen, and then when they put that with carbon dioxide they've been captured, then they can create alcohol after proper distillation. So that's what you get here from Merco again. A way to capture carbon and develop a negative emission technology. As well as drinks, you can go for diamond, and that's another example of using carbon that's been sucked out of the atmosphere, so direct capture, and develop diamond, because diamond is pure carbon. So that's another area where people are innovating, is what can they do in CCUS, carbon capture. You've got the U of utilization and storage, and whereas you're looking at storage through the infrastructure you've got in Scotland, about the oil and gas infrastructure, you need to think about utilization. What can you do with that capture carbon? And that's what those people are doing. Another one closer to home, an active travel, that would deliver a carbon capture in here, is the company has developed a concept where they basically absorb air pollution and therefore carbon and deliver clean air to the rider. So again, to my mind, not the most beautiful bicycle, but it does what it's supposed to do, which is it deliver to the user clean air, and in the process it captures all those CO2 and greenhouse gas we talked about. So if I looked at innovation chapter 1 and 8, and there is a report by aiming, and if we look at areas for innovations, where would they recommend? Then you've got energy, and by that is how you minimize your input and minimize your cost, but how you maximize the distributions and how you maximize the viability, the revenue you get from it. So those are areas where they would recommend to look at innovations, and where they think that could probably attract interest from the government and therefore attract grants, because remember, your grant needs to be linked to the government policy. The other area is on fuel, and that includes fuel mix, or the fuel compositions, or the combustion of fuels, what come out of it. It looks at alternative fuels. So this is another area of interest and innovations. And then you go technologies, and looking at vibration, looking at waste, and we talked about that last week, and looking at how you can apply those technology in extreme environment. And then here, for example, we're talking about offshore and floating offshore, which is pretty extreme, or subsea would be another area of interest. And finally, it's a digital piece. It's programming. It's how the Internet of Things is, how you can predict the usage, how you can do things like that. It's how you can manage big data. Big data is a big trend. So it's one thing to collect all those data, and the next thing is what do you do with it? What can you do with it? So that was one of the four of the areas, but you can see the four fields, I would say, but each field has got multiple options as to where to innovate and where are the opportunities. You also have another report by Vivid Economics, and again they are very similar, but they split it into areas of opportunity for innovation: electricity, bioenergy. We talked about hydrogen and CCUS. And again, in electricity, you see the same thing coming up. Here you've got digital again and automation, but you're also looking at storage and generation. And in generation, I think the big focus will be on floating, and there's a big focus on floating offshore platforms. And then you've got all the bioenergy piece to it, and there is one piece which is about how you create, like gasification is how you create energy from crops. But the other piece of it is what crops, what's the feedstock, what's the breeds you grow to deliver, to maximize the bioenergy. So that's areas of innovations, more, I would say, probably on the agriculture piece, but on the technology piece, and it's the gasification. And then you've got hydrogen, with a special focus on electrolyzers and the reformers, and also fuel cell. So here you can see the same theme about electrolyzer to generate energy and fuel cell to store energy. So the double challenge for energy is generation and storage. And then you've got CCUS, and that's carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And that's what you've seen in the series of innovation I've showed you. Storage piece, which is again how you do it, and the use of oil and gas industry, or oil and gas network we've got in place. And then you've got the end-to-end, and the post-combustion is like, what do you do with the utilization? So you've got carbon capture, post-combustion is about utilization, and S is about storage, and then what can you do with it? That's the whole idea. So an example would be to short or low-hanging fruit very quickly, it would be to use carbon capture to enhance oil and gas production. So, and there is a final one, which is ocean entities. And interestingly, that this is a series of, I would say, brainstorming almost, or ideas of how you could use entities. But ocean entities is really immature. So none of them exist yet, but they are potentials, and they are of interest because they don't exist that they are valuable. It's because those are areas where there is room for innovation, where there is room to be pioneers. And as I've said, Scotland has got the skills and the knowledge to be pioneers, as demonstrated by the number of world first we talked about earlier on. So that's why I've added that slide here. It's opportunity, but ocean entities will have a big piece to play, a big part to play in that NET concept. But those are opportunities, those are open. So if I was going to take away from all that innovation part, there's a lot of fabrication opportunities that you've seen. There is a big things: wind, tidal, wave, hydrogen, CCUS. There is a lot of opportunity for fabrication, but not all projects are big to start with. And I've showed you the concept of small wind, like in Berlin, or community ownerships, or the piezoelectric. So it doesn't have to be a big project. You don't have to be an expert in building those big, massive things. You can look into smaller projects. And not all innovations are in fabrication. So I showed you there are innovations, being digital or not, on the front of maintenance and efficiency. So how do you improve all that? And there could be efficiency, for example, of carbon capture through the pipeline and making sure there's no leak, that sort of thing. And finally, what you see out of that is, while Scotland is at the forefront of wind energy, floating wind and all those areas, which are quite big, and which are at the forefront, and America is trying to step into it, and Europe is trying to step into it, but really Scotland is a leading figure. In terms of NET, that's where there is a lack in Scotland. You can see that every time I've been looking for NET, I had to go further afield. So that's maybe an area where there is room for innovation, and it's an area where maybe we want to focus on going forward. So all that is about all those innovations, and again, we've looked at it across those 8 different actions plan, being wind, being harbour, being hydro, new technology or carbon pressure, nuclear fusion, bioenergy, hydrogen, and we looked at it in Scotland, the UK, and further afield. So those were the first part. And what we'd recommend now is that we take a break and I'll address the next 3 parts in the second half.
Sounds good.
Okay.
So we're nearly at 9:15 just now. We'll be back at 9:20. Sound okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, while we're on speaker, just a reminder, anybody got any questions, any comments as they come up, please do feel free to stick them in chat. And we do have some time at the end for any questions or comments coming up. And after that, I'll let you have your break and we'll see you soon.
Okay, so I think we're going to restart and we're going to look at the next three parts about the define, develop and deliver. We will complete the discover piece about innovations. So if I look at define, in define what we want to look at are the opportunities that those two chapters deliver, and that creates the motivation, the reason to go in there. So we find from the discover piece, the innovations, we find out what the world is doing, right? And here we see the opportunity driven by the government actions. And the government actions and the opportunities are going to be delivered by the outcomes. So as part of the plan, the government's got outcomes. There are things they want to deliver, they want to arrive at, and they'll design policies to deliver those outcomes. And those policies will drive actions, and those actions are going to create opportunities to tap into. And if you look at electricity, they're looking at three outcomes, which is the increase of renewables, a better steady supply and a secure supply of electricity. And then in technology that allow for generation of electricity and the decarbonization of electricity. So those are the three outcomes they're going to be looking for. And by default, they develop policies and actions that deliver those outcomes. And that creates opportunities for companies to tap into. If I look into net, again, it's about looking at application. That's why I said earlier on that there is not a lot of innovation in Scotland regarding nets. So there is to look at what can we do in Scotland. And then the two areas of focus is carbon capture, and especially with a view to utilise the oil and gas infrastructure we've already got in place, and the offshore one to that to use as storage. And the other area is bioenergy, and here I'm not looking at bioenergy from an agricultural point of view. I'm thinking of bioenergy as a generation of energy from bio input or bio feedstock. So what are those actions? Then you can see them here, and for both chapters. And wind is a big one, being onshore and offshore. Hydrogen is another one, and we talked about it. And there is a big bet on the hydrogen economy, and the belief that that's going to go forward. And then you've got technologies, and technology being, NETs, technology being emerging technology or established technology, and technology regarding storage as well as generation. So in this case, they've got a strong interest for what I mentioned in Scotland about hydro storage. And you've got CCS, which is also carbon capture, so another big area of energy, or a big area of energy, sorry, a big area for negative emissions in terms of storage and utilization and capture. And finally, you've got bioenergy, as I mentioned, but it's bioenergy for electricity generation we're looking at here. It's not looking at bioenergy from a crops point of view. So we're going to look now at projects and opportunities, and we look at integrated systems and the wind farm and hydrogen and ports and harbours, and we'll have a bit further afield. But I wanted to draw your attention to one service which is provided by Scottish Enterprise, which is about market research. So they've got a research service that can help you once you've identified, or if you want to identify an opportunity linked to one of those actions we discussed, or one of those innovations we looked at, then those guys can help you making a business case for it. So it's a service which is free, which you should be able to leverage. So that's what the takeaway is here, or that's why this availability of support. So if I look at projects, one of the big projects is looking at the UK Continental Shelf, the UKCS, which is pretty unique in the world. And you've got that map being put together to deliver an integrated systems that's been put together by the Oil and Gas Technology Centre. And you can see how you've got those various bits and pieces like the offshore oil and gas, the wind farm, the hydrogen and the carbon capture, and how you can move from 2020 to 2050 to an integrated system. So where you use offshore wind to create hydrogen, and then if you use gas from platform to create hydrogen, you've got carbon capture. So that's the concept, is how do you create an integrated system? So that's a big project. That's one that's got ambitions and how to develop that integrated process with various milestones on the way there and the requirement for development. So that's one of the projects. Another project I've talked about a lot is about floating offshore, because people want to know how can I tap into that clean wind offshore, but in deep water. And again, Scotland's got a lot of knowledge and technology about that because of the oil and gas experience. And here you can see where those wind farms are planned and what they are planning to do. And you can see where the focus will be, and the focus will be on cost reductions. And you're looking at things like mooring line, you're looking at things like cables and development costs. So all those are the areas where those big projects will matter. So again, it shows you projects, and in this case, a good support will be from Catapult, the ore Catapult. So that's another area. Another big project overall is what we can call the hydrogen coast. And hydrogen is a big deal. It's a big deal in Scotland, especially on the East Coast. And you can see here there's some big project. The most renowned one you may have heard about is Acorn. And we've got Acorn CCS and hydrogen at St Fergus. But there's also other projects like in Orkney, and I mentioned. It goes all the way down to Fife and past Dundee. So it's all that West Coast side. So there is a lot of projects, and here you can see the key stakeholders in those projects. So again, opportunities here in project on the hydrogen side of things. And then in terms of carbon capture, you've got Peterhead power stations, which is the only flexible gas-fired power station in Scotland. But we're looking at how can we leverage, again, knowledge, technology, learning, infrastructure to capture and store carbon. So that's another big project. And then you're looking at harbour side of things, and you've got Firth ports with the port of Leith. And what you're finding out is again a lot of opportunity for development, a big project, but each port seems to be focusing on a specific area. So for Leith, you're looking at offshore wind being one of the key areas. For Hunterston, they're looking at power and heat generation. They are looking at how can they bring energy consuming industries in an area where they will be developing, green power. So that's Hunterston Parc. And then Cromarty is about hydrogen and creating a hydrogen hub. And one of the area of interest in the north is the distilleries, which I mentioned earlier on. And the reason is of interest because they tend to be away from the big natural gas network. So how can they get power? And an idea would be hydrogen, and that's what you've seen in that distillery in Orkney, which is looking at developing hydrogen power. And the reason for that is I think people believe that hydrogen will have a much more heat capacity than electricity. So that's Cromarty is focusing on hydrogen. And then if you go further afield, you've got a project like Core Wind. So it's not only Scotland specific, that's what you want to look at. And Core Wind is focusing on the anchor technology, and specifically the concrete anchor for offshore floating farms. So a big project in here was in Portugal, but you can see how it goes much further afield than just Scotland. And another one on hydrogen is in the Netherlands, again using offshore wind to power electrolyzer and create hydrogen. So that's another area where they are trying to develop. So what's the takeaway from that defined stage? There is a lot of projects, as you can see, big projects where you can get your teeth into, you can get involved in Scotland, but also further afield. So it is an international movement, if you want. It's an international ambition. If you think back about those UN SDG, you know, the idea about it is everybody, including Europe, including the US, including the Far East, everybody is looking at contributing to that. So whatever you develop will have a use in more than just your local community. And all those are generating opportunities, you know, being energy regeneration, being in hydrogen, being in carbon capture, bioenergy. So there is a lot of opportunity out there. So out of that define, if you look at projects, there is projects to be able to get to. And then if we look at skills now and look at develop skill, and the skill to develop capability specifically to those chapter 1 and 8. So you could look at the skills for offshore energy in terms of electricity, that's the main focus. In terms of negative emission technology, you're looking at CO2 management and a whole range. So what do you do for those skills? So the first thing to do is to find out what is needed and who you're going to scale and upskills. And that's just a template to explain what we're trying to do. You're looking at the 5W and the 2Hs, and what you want to find out is what skills you need. And the skill you need is defined by the chapters you want to play into. So in here, we're looking at chapter 1 and 8. And the roadmap you want to design. So that will define what skill you need and what level of proficiency you need and why. So why do you want those skills? So in this case, is that because you don't have them in house, or is that because it's something new, or is that something you need to upskill or raise skills? And when do you need them? So that's your roadmap. And the idea is that a skill you need when you're going to be ready in 3 months' time? Is that a skill you need to be ready now? Is that a skill you need in 24 months' time when you look at your net zero roadmap? And then how long do you need it for? So is that a skill because you're going to service something you deliver, but you don't need it for the development of it. So you need long term for servicing, but short term for development. And where you're going to get it. And we talked about that OSF, you know, on the job or social or formal in the classroom. And finally, how much piece is about the funding, what funding is available. So and that's your actions, that's your roadmap. So from that you're left with the who. And then you decide who you want to train and also what level of proficiency you want them to achieve and the interest of that individual into that skills, because people will be really keen, as we've seen, to be trained, but you need to get value for that training. So you need someone interested in it rather than forcing down their throat. So those are the 5W and the 2Hs in your skill matrix. Now, if I focus on chapter 1 and 8 skills, what are they? You need the meta skills or the generic skills, and that's true regardless of the chapter. And you're looking at product life cycle, you're looking at, you know, data accounting, environmental accounting, and quite importantly, you've got those meta skills that everybody refers to, you know, about adaptability, about communications, about innovation. We talked about it, you know, about creativity and curiosity, that sort of things. And then specific to those chapters, you've got marine energy, and we talked about that. We talked about that through wind or tidal or wave or even people may argue, solar, floating solar. And wind energy is a big deal. It's a big one because definitely Scotland is at the forefront of wind energy. And you would have seen that with the world first and the floating and how efficient we can make it. So definitely something to use. And the experience in marine energy through the oil and gas is quite significant. And then again, in terms of nets, then you're looking at carbon capture and storage. And here there's a big deal about working upscaling or rescaling operators. I mean, the infrastructure is in place, the people are there, but it's all focused on oil and gas. Can we refocus it on carbon capture? That's the idea behind it. And the new one we talked about, which is bioenergy, which is anaerobic digestion. So those are the areas, the skills that people are likely to be looking for. So what do you do? Where do you get those skills? And how do you fund them? So the first port of call would be academia, and you can look at Open University, which is more, I would say, on the job, or you could be looking at universities or colleges, and which is more the formal piece of it, or you could look at institutes like an MIS, but you can also get support from agencies or other organizations which are not academia. And in here, an example would be the Oil and Gas Technology Centre, the Climate Solutions, which provide a good training and certificates for people, and especially to, I would say, get your team on board, get to understand what net zero means, and to understand what net zero impact would be. And it could be even all the way up to Orkney with the European Marine Centre, Energy Centre. So there is locations, Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Orkney. And finally, there are fundings available to support all those things. And in here, I've put some key examples. So in terms of support, when I looked at it last week, you could see that in Scottish Enterprise, there was 448, almost 450 options for support. And almost 90 of them were for funding. Now, all of them would be relevant. Not all of them would be relevant to what you want to do. But what that tells me is there's a lot of support out there. There's a lot of funding as well out there. And it's a case of finding the one that works for what you want to do and support what you want to do. And the Scottish Enterprise website is mainly aimed at funding provided by Scotland and the UK. Further afield, you've got the Funding Information and Support Service, FISS, and they will focus. So at mid-May, when I attended a webinar, at that point in time, they had 241 potential calls in their database for support. And those fundings are more like international funding, not the one you got in Scotland. So for Scotland, look at the first one, Scottish Enterprise. Further afield, look at FISS. And then you've got more specific funding, like for KTP, you've got the KTN, and that's about skills and bringing skills through, I would say mainly graduate skills. And you've got other options. So I've talked about the National Transition Training Fund, from Skill Development Scotland, and also Skillsforce, which is also driven by Skill Development Scotland. You've got the Flexible Workforce Development Funds. So there are a lot of funding opportunities. And other area as well is where you can get skills is in centres. And by that, I mean, there is a range of centres around Scotland, all the way from Orkney, which got the European Marine Energy Centre, down to the south of Scotland. So you can get access to skills. What that shows you is you can get access to skills in the area you are interested in, without having to bring those skills in-house. If you go back to that matrix and you feel that's a skill you need maybe to develop, but you don't want it past a certain time because after that you just want to service. Then here you go. You've got plenty of skill, and that could be things like the Mocean Centre, Scotland Innovation Park near Dundee, I think. You've got an MIS, which we all heard about, or FRC, and you've got Orkney. So plenty of centres, plenty of places to get the skills. Again, here is a case of, is it biotechnology skills you're looking for? Is it manufacturing skills? So that's what you want. You want to find out. In your case, you're looking at electricity, you're looking at offshore, and or catapult would be a key one. So what's the takeaway from that develop stage, right? So there is no argument that with innovation and developing new product, developing new services, it will come the requirement for new skills. And the two key areas I think we'll need to think about is reskilling, upskilling oil and gas workforce. That there is a recognition that we've got a lot of skills in here, a lot of people, a lot of knowledge that we need to leverage, but we need to leverage it towards a greener purpose. And that greener purpose is basically carbon capture. And also you're looking at developing new skills in the world of hydrogen and the world of bioenergy. But the main takeaway from all this is you're not on your own, right? There is guidance, there is support, and there is funding available for you to access those skills. So if I look at the last part of all this, and it's about building a roadmap, it's about delivering what we saying about that roadmap being smart. So again, you've got support here to help you. And an example is the cluster builder, which is from Scottish Engineering, and they can help you tapping into that electricity and hydrogen in rail. So this is one of the forum you can join, one of the support you can get into, right, how do I tap into electricity, how do I tap into hydrogen, how do I go into rail? And that's where they can support you. On the same other cluster, the same front, there's got electricity and wind in the offshore sector, and that's another cluster that Scottish Engineering is gonna support. So here to build your roadmap, there are forums, there are places where you can go and get help, and you can join. And then here's an example of a roadmap. You would deliver. You would look at to 2035, 2040, 2050, and what you're looking at is the various scopes which we talked about in session 1, and there is a recognition that at the end it is likely you'll never be zero. So you will need emission trading schemes at some point, but the least you emit, the least ATS you need, the cheaper it's going to be. So that's a concept. That's just to show you an idea. And then if you look at SCDI, I'm proposing a 5 easy step to net zero. So where do you start is a challenge of the roadmap. And the first thing is where they say know your number. So how much do you emit? Where do you stand today? And then you start with the basics, and that means what's easy to do. So maybe your contract is coming for renewal, and the contract I meant by energy supply contract, and then you may want to use that opportunity to move to maybe renewable electricity, or you want to use that opportunity to move from gas to electricity or anything like that. And as you can see here, switching to electrics and going to renewable are 2 of those big steps. And then there is that ATS I talked about. So the tongue-in-cheek here, protect bees and plant trees, but that's basically what the offset is about. So that gives you an idea of how to start that journey. And then you've got tools available. So an example here is SDG Action Manager for the UN SDG. So you can use tools. And then you also have process. And the idea here is not reinvent the wheel. It's what can you leverage you're already doing today, because you'll be doing a lot, especially if you're 14001 certified. So and as you can see here, like that's the main route that companies are taking. You know, standards is one of the big ways that companies are using to deliver their carbon neutrality, if you want, their net zero. And the reason for that is standards can be recognized internationally and they are auditable. So you can get someone independent to review it. But we've talked about 14001, which is great for if you want managing it. But you can look at other standards which are strongly linked to each other, which is 14064, which is international, or 2050, which is British, but both are very interconnected. So there is more options in terms, but the key message here is use what you've got, use what you're already doing. Don't create too much work. And here's an example of how you use 14001 to link your ambitions, your green ambitions, to climate change. So there is a document which is available to do that and help again starting that roadmap. And finally, in terms of funding, the one I would like to highlight is the Green Job Fund, which is significant in money. Unfortunately, the first call I think is completing on Thursday, but I think we sent a communication a few weeks back on that one. But I would say if you make call one, I would expect more calls to come because of the size of the fund. But again, there is funding out there to get you on that map. So what's the takeaway from a deliver piece? The takeaway is that you've got guidance, you've got tools and support, you know, from you're not on your own basically, and you got that for developing that roadmap and then measuring its progress and then funding its implementation. But one of the key messages is make it smart. That's such a good way. So what's the summary of that chapter 1? So we looked at the vision, and for the vision, we looked at innovations, and we looked at innovation in Scotland, the UK, and the rest of the world. We looked at the define piece, which is about motivations, and the motivations, as I said, are the projects to get involved in. But all these are driven by the outcomes. So outcomes will drive policy, that will drive actions, that will drive projects. In terms of skills, we looked at how do you assess what's needed, where you can access those skills, and what funding is available. And in terms of delivery and the roadmap, we looked at the pathways, we looked at the tools that are available, again, a way to get that out of the process with through the standards, and the funding. So on that, I would like to thank you all for taking the time to join. I would like to say that, you know, I think you probably receive a communication. We're happy to have one-to-ones because those are quite generic, but we can look at having one-to-one to support you in your specific case or your specific ambitions or where you are on our journey, or helping you on the journey, or helping you getting on the journey. So more than happy to help. And please just come and get in touch.
Okay, thanks, Eric. There are no new questions in chat. There was a comment raised by Vaughan earlier on, and we'll get the webinars from last week, both the recording and the slides, and also today's. We're going to aim to get them loaded up today. So anybody looking for them, please have a look back later on today, and we'll aim to get them up by then. I'll pause for a minute or a few seconds just in case anybody wants to ask anything directly. If you do so, come off mute. We're welcome to hear from you. I don't see any microphones coming off mute there, so I think that's probably us, Eric. So thanks very much, everyone, for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of the day. And as Eric says, please give us a shout if there's something we can do help in this area. Thanks all.